Welcome. This looks like we've got people signing in from all over the world, which is wonderful. Let me get us started. My name's Darlene Fisher, and I'm an international accreditation leader for New England Association of Schools and Colleges. And I'm very happy today to be hosting a webinar with some wonderful educators and architects who have been working to make learning spaces even more viable and interesting and effective. I was lucky enough to visit Antwerp International School earlier this year and met Andreas, who's the head of school, and his architect, Jane, who had rebuilt a big section of the school and created amazing differences and spaces for us. They will share with us later today. Some basic logistics for the webinar. You can see the chat's going to get very busy with lots of people from all over the world. So if you have a question, it's even more effective if you can put it into the Q&A, because we will have 3 sessions or sections of the presentation, and within it 2 opportunities for you to ask questions. So please do feel free to put some questions into the Q&A. They will be more easily seen in that section. But let me start quickly now with some bios, and then we will hear from the people themselves. So Andreas has been head of the Antwerp International School since about 2015. He's led 2 IB schools now, and also prior to that been involved, I think, with the College of Architects, and I think that might have had something to do with his interest in architecture. His school has taken on the CLP, the Collaborative Learning Protocol, and one of the learning principles they've chosen is learning space and time, and that was definitely an area that the school has been focusing on. In the process of changing part of the school and rebuilding and renovating, he has employed Jane Crowhurst, who's director at TP Bennett Architects. She works globally on educational projects and is a firm and passionate believer that both architecture and education are powerful instruments for positive, enduring change within society. So, and this you'll see in the work that she's done and as she speaks about the power of architecture to enable quality learning. Emily Hale is also joining us today, and she works also at TP Bennett, and her section, her specialty areas are education, health, and residential architecture, with a particular focus and commitment to sustainability and that the part that plays in our environment. So without further ado, I want to give the time for the architects and educators to speak about this wonderful topic and to share their stories. So Jane and Emily and Andreas, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Darlene, and hello to everybody. We are just so excited to be here today. We're coming to you from our offices in London, and we are looking forward to hopefully a very interesting discussion, and most importantly, to hear your thoughts about the things that we're about to talk about. Just to kind of get us started, what we would like to do is start with a very quick exercise. And I would like you to cast your minds back to when you were at school. And we would like to find out about the spaces that you learned in. So in particular, what I'd like you to do is think of a space or an area or a building that had a positive impact on your learning. And then also think of a space, area, or building that had a negative impact on your learning. And really, this can be anything that you like. This might be located within the educational buildings that you worked in. It might have been a space in your home. We'd like you to think of a space that had a positive impact and a space that had a negative impact, and then put your answers into the chat. Please, if you, for example, want to say, oh, the library, don't just write the library. If you can, write the library because it was cozy and warm, or something like that. We'll just give you a few seconds to think about that, and please just pop your answers into the chat. If inspiration is not striking you at the moment, then feel free to carry on putting in those thoughts as the webinar progresses. So really, it's a very personal thing. Okay. Are we getting responses? Great. Okay, so then I'm going to move on to the body of the presentation then. I think what is very important for us as architects is that we don't want to be just creating spaces or building buildings without really understanding in a great amount of detail what a school is all about. Where is the school presently? Where does the school want to be in the future? How does it want its teaching, its learning to develop and change over time? And we believe that it's only when we fully understand those things that we can actually put pen to paper and start to create designs. And that, thankfully, is exactly what happened at Antwerp, because we had such an open-minded client who was very eager to work with us through a process of participatory design, or stakeholder engagement is another way of talking about it. I believe that's why we ended up with a successful project that we did at the end, because we were able to connect with every single part of the school with in-depth discussions, with interviews, with workshops, with an online survey. And we felt, as we were designing, that we really understood Antwerp. And I think it's not to say that all the answers were there at the beginning. Obviously, as the project progressed, we maintained that contact, we maintained that interaction, and that helped us to refine the design as we went through the process. So just to give you a very quick overview of what happened at Antwerp, because of course that's, we're going to focus a lot on this particular example. Essentially, they had an existing building within the center of the campus, very underutilized. The heart of it was an old gym. And through this process of participatory design, we transformed this space from the old gym you see in front of you. Just along the way, this was when we'd started construction, a very amazing day for us, when we started to punch holes in the roof, and you'll see why later, because we wanted to flood this space with natural daylight. We then ended up with the final result, which is in front of you now. So it was very much about moving from that underutilized space, that gym, to this new space, which as I move through the presentation, you will see how it has impacted Antwerp and how it is aligned with what Andreas and his team wanted to achieve at the beginning of the project. So the first sort of section I'd like to talk about is, how do spaces educate? So what can we as architects do to complement and support the process of education? And from our perspective, what we believe is that we need to support and further the process of inquiry. So we need to enable learning in all of its forms, experimentation, and then reflection. So this is a plan of the Antwerp project. And just what I want to draw to your attention initially is that it's a mix of spaces. So essentially, I hope, can everybody see my cursor? Yes, good. So basically, this area here was the heart of the building, which was the old gym. Below, there were a series of old changing areas and first aid rooms and that kind of thing. Above, there were some existing science labs. So what we created in this space was a mix of open plan space. So you can see all of this is open for a variety of different uses, coupled with enclosed spaces, because we don't believe that schools should be entirely open or entirely closed. I think this is a very valuable lesson we can actually learn from office design, because we believe with office design, the pendulum swung far too far into open offices. Everybody must sit in open plan. And that was a disaster for so many things. And I'm slightly concerned that some schools might also be moving in that direction. And it's not always the right response. We firmly believe that there has to be a combination of enclosed spaces and open spaces, and then easy movement between those two spaces. So this is just to give you a very quick overview, and you can see from this plan the variety and the options that are available to users of this building. So then we move on to basically learning in all its forms. Now, you're all educators. I don't need to kind of reiterate how this takes place, from a purely didactical way through to learning in groups, through to individual learning, there are many different ways of learning. And so obviously within the school, our focus was to create these spaces. So these kind of spaces for group learning, the space for more intimate, small group learning, or the one-on-one instruction, with the teacher. This, for example, is one of the science labs. And at this moment in time, they happen to be writing an exam. So it's set out in quite a formal way. But all of these desks can be moved to create a different type of learning space. So we provided a variety of spaces in which to learn. Then, vitally important also were the spaces within which to experiment. Now, they can sometimes be the same spaces, it just depends how you use them. And I think what's very critical for us is, for example, here you see the small group working together, but this particular student wanted to move away and kind of focus particularly on his work. And so from an architectural perspective, the interesting thing for us is, how do we plan that classroom so that it is flexible enough? And in fact, that there's a generosity of space, so that if the individual feels they want to move away from the group dynamic, they actually have the ability to do that. Similarly, over here, you've got these girls who are kind of eating and chatting, and these boys engaged sort of in individual work. But the length, the design of the table, because it's so long, means that different activities can be happening simultaneously. What's quite interesting is this is actually one of the new maths classrooms over here. In each one of the new classrooms, we designed these bespoke elements which sit in the classroom with screens and storage and writable glass. What was interesting about observing this maths lesson in progress was that what they would be doing is kind of working in groups at the tables, and then moving to this side of the classroom where we have writable glass again on the wall, and the students would go up and explain what they've been doing and writing on the glass. And I think there's something to be said, as much as we try and move away from hierarchy within the classroom, obviously for practical reasons, this kind of screen element tends to be in a fixed position. And I think it's nice that the students can move sideways into the classroom. It almost gives you a sense of confidence that you're not going up to where maybe the teacher's standing, but you can use the writable wall on the side. And we found that there was a very easy, very flowing kind of dynamic within that space. Then for us, what's absolutely critical in terms of experimentation is that the users of the building have the ability to create boundaries. Sometimes the boundaries are predetermined by the space. So you might move into a smaller meeting room, and that is what we call a fixed boundary, and you are protected within that space. Other times you might want to drag a piece of furniture or a couple of pieces of furniture and create flexible boundaries. So you're creating this flexible boundary. The signal you're sending to other users of the building is, I've created this space, or we as a group have created this space, and this is where we're going to experiment. This is where we're going to think about things, discuss things, investigate. And we think that that is incredibly important within the space, that the users are able to have that impact and create spaces within which they feel calm and comfortable enough to experiment. So that's vitally important. Then, of course, the process of review. And I think, again, for us, what is the opportunity that the building offers? So here is a gallery, the gallery within Antwerp, within the STEM zone. And obviously, these students had just built their robotic cars, and they were fighting with each other and testing the robotic cars. So that's kind of like happening out in the open. Other students were walking past, getting involved, looking at what was happening. You might have a more formal form of review. Again, do you have the space to do that? And then obviously critically as well is, the final kind of maybe the work of art that you're putting up on the wall. We went to great lengths to ensure that there were ample opportunities within the building to actually do this in hopefully what is a beautiful way. So it's not just like a notice board stuck on a wall, but for example, in this instance, this is actually acoustic paneling, which is multifunctional because you can attach work to that very easily. And then actually almost, I suppose, a sort of a museum-like quality. Can we create beautiful elements within the architecture against which displays can occur, and which actually are celebrating in a very positive way the student work. We were so excited about this, which happened just before Christmas. Obviously, this is the colonnade, which runs around the side of the gym. And the teachers and students had worked in the Fab Lab and created their own pedestals to support their little bits and pieces of sculpture, and then kind of set that up along the rhythm of the columns that we'd created. So that kind of, it's so exciting when users kind of take control of the space and start to respond to some of the architectural elements that we set up. I love this picture because for me, this is kind of inquiry in action. This is actually in the fabrication lab, and we have, again, these bespoke elements on one side of the lab, which include opportunities for storage of materials. But excitingly, there's also this opportunity to display a work in progress or finished works. So you've kind of got all of the activity happening here, the experimentation, the learning. Then I can put my work here, I can think about it for a week, come back to it. And more than that as well, because this is actually against a glass wall, other users of the building walking past are tempted to look in, look at that experiment, see what's happening, and thereby improve, and kind of you create this transfer of knowledge, this transfer of experience. So there are, though, a certain number of prerequisites for all of these things to work. And for us, the first one, which is vitally important, is this concept of transparency. So within the building, as you can see, we punched through a huge window here. So we have this continuous connection to the outside. That is really, really important. And then within the building, you've actually got the connections through to the various rooms. There's more on the side you'll see as we go through. But the idea is that you're not in this dark space. There's the connections, there's connections extra, so outside connections, and intra connections, so within the building. So you have that transparency. As you saw me mention just a moment ago about the fabrication lab, this is another one. This is one of the science labs. Again, this bespoke element against the glass wall. So because at the beginning, certainly a number of teachers were concerned and said, well, it's going to be like working in a fishbowl if you put glass walls up there. We said, no, don't panic, because the idea is to actually put shelving in front of the glass walls so that is display, obviously, as I was explaining, but more importantly, it's mitigated transparency. So you walk past, you get a sense of what's happening, but you're not really disturbing what's happening within the classroom. So again, this idea of transparency, we all, if we see what's happening, we become curious. And when we become curious, then that kind of, I believe, inspires us to learn. So it's about the transparency and its effect on our curiosity. Again, this idea of flexibility is so vitally important. I mean, this is kind of in the heart of the STEM zone, and it was actually wonderful because the morning was a sort of a mindfulness class, for one of the younger grades. And then in the afternoon, we had the older students having an English literature class in exactly the same space, because they could take control of the space and they could decide how they wanted to use it. So again, flexibility. One of the kind of more radical things that Antwerp does is that robotics was actually taken out of an enclosed space and put in the middle of the collaboration zone. And you can actually just see the robotics element in the background here. So normally these tables are actually used for the clean work of robotics. But in this instance, this was a project day at the school. You simply kind of take that space, cover the table with something to protect it, and start a different kind of activity or project work. So the space itself has to be flexible. It has to accommodate those needs and those changes. The other thing that is essential for, how do buildings educate is obviously technology. Now, we always believe that technology should be seamlessly integrated into a building. In Antwerp, obviously, we had the screen element, which I alluded to earlier. Charging points throughout the building are vitally important. Overhead power supplies, all of those things. But going forward, we are interested in how technology will develop within school buildings. And I think personally that there's a huge amount that can be done in terms of truly making spaces. We've all learned this from COVID. So how can we truly make a space a hybrid space? So if for whatever reason a student is absent, or how can they feel as though they are sort of in the space, even if they're physically not in the space? And one of the exciting products that we found is this owl camera, which kind of sits in the middle. Some of you may be familiar with this, sits in the middle of the room, and it's actually got cameras 360 around the owl, so that the person or people who are on the screen get a sense of the room in its entirety. So it's kind of embedding you within that space, and not just always this break with a screen and you feel disconnected. I think another exciting kind of development is this idea of movable technology, which is becoming more and more prevalent. So you can, as you set up your boundaries, set up your kind of flexible experimentation space, pull in your movable piece of technology as well, either to show information or to connect with someone who can't be there. So all of that is kind of I think coming through more and more. And then if we go even further, the question is, in the future, how will we be using augmented reality or virtual reality to transport students out of the school environment and to the pyramids in Egypt? So it's all of those kinds of questions, and the space then to respond to that. Another vitally important prerequisite is seamless transition. So the idea is, for example, if I'm working in one of these classrooms, but we need to have a breakout session for a small number of students, they must easily be able to move out of their classroom. You can see there are bits and pieces of furniture outside the classrooms, high tables to more sort of comfortable seating, where they can come together and still be seen from inside the classroom. I can still see what's happening. I can still see where they are, but they can easily move back and forth, between the classroom and the kind of breakout spaces outside. Similarly, the flow through the building, it allows me, as I'm kind of moving through the building, I'm looking, I'm going, oh, that's happening there, that's happening there. Oh, I see a space there where I can sit. It's kind of, I have an immediate awareness of what's happening. So an example of what that looks like, that's that movement through the building that I was just explaining. So I can walk through, I can see what's happening in the canteen area over here, I can see what's happening in these classrooms on the side. And overall, I have a sense of the space. I have a sense of what's happening. This was the example I gave you, where you sort of inside the classroom move easily out to the breakout table just outside, and still that connection. Just so incredibly important from our perspective as well is that link to the outside, and how are you encouraging teaching to take place outside? What do you need to do in those outside areas to truly support this? And one of the key things is obviously that it's easy to get out. This is one of the doors in the STEM zone in Antwerp, and you can see again how this project work just naturally spilled outside, and it's just so wonderful to behold. This is a different project, one that we actually completed in the UK for Amesbury School, and again you can see this beautiful opening and this movement through, I'll show in the next picture, to this lovely deck. This was a particularly exciting project because this actually managed to preserve this beautiful, fantastic old tree on the site, and really works to develop that connection between the inside and the outside. So we obviously, for many reasons, it's just so important for students to be outside as much as possible, for fresh air, for sunlight. And we also find that the very act of being outside kind of frees the mind as well, and which is a very positive thing. As much as we're obviously very proud of this project, it's a bit less experimental. And I recently became aware actually of a playground that actually was built in Amsterdam sort of a number of years after World War II. And this was such a special place because it was actually on an island. You could only reach it by a small barge, and it was just called kind of the Children's Adventure Playground. And they could actually come into this playground. There was a little bit of supervision. And basically what they were using were sort of bits and pieces of rubble and things left over from the war, and were able to just build houses the way they wanted to build them in a very experimental and a very hands-on way, which as a mother, when I see this and I think, oh my goodness, this is just so terrifying. But I think what we need to do is we need to think about our external spaces and even our internal spaces, how can we push the students? How can we make things more experimental, give them more agency? So I'll just leave you with that thought from that particular playground. And then what I'd like to move on to is spaces which empower. And I think how we empower students or users is that we need to be egalitarian and inclusive. And more than that, we also need to provide a variety of spaces. So they, again, have the agency, the autonomy to choose the space which is right for them, which is right for what they need to do at that moment in time. So this again is the egalitarian access to space at Antwerp, and you can see that the feeling is I can come in. Maybe you can see this chap sitting here in this niche. He's found his space. He's doing his thing. These group of girls over here are maybe socializing, but the building is big enough and it's interesting enough that we believe everybody can find the space that is best suited to them. So it's an egalitarian use of space. And also what's interesting is you'll often find Andreas actually working up here as well. So it's that behavior of you can use the space as you see fit, modeled by the leadership team. It goes without saying that we have to obviously consider all of the aspects of equality when we design buildings. Also, I think what's very important is the opportunity to socialize, which the school didn't have beforehand. And again, what they've done is kind of dragged the furniture and created their own special socializing place. As well, the importance of play. There's one corner which we've deliberately left empty, as it were, or undesigned. And the idea is that over time, the students will colonize that space. Already they have the football tables in here. There's an idea to bring in a bike for creating, you ride the bike during break and that sort of generates electricity. And I hope a lot more will happen in that space, that they take control and they develop it and change it in the way that they would like to. Very important for us at TP Bennett is this recognition that everybody's different. There's a huge range of cognitive diversity. And so when we design spaces, we have to be cognizant of the fact that some people like the noise and the drama and to be in the center of things. Others want to be, away, want to be separate. And of course, this is not always fixed. I mean, some of it's down to your personality, some of it's down to the task at hand and the way you're feeling on that particular day. So the point is to provide this range of spaces so you can go from areas of very high stimulation to areas of less stimulation in a very easy way. Again, I spoke about empowering, and that's really what comes through in Antwerp. So we've got the ability to, again, be by yourself. This was a Dutch lesson that was happening here. So this teacher had decided this was the best place for this lesson to happen. Again, students working quietly up here while there's a lesson going on down here. Everybody's choosing the space that is best suited to them. Obviously, very important is the idea of physical well-being. And I alluded to, you remember that earlier shot with the sunlight streaming in. Sunlight is so important to our well-being. And actually, there's a vast body of research proving that brightly well-lit with natural light spaces do impact test results. So the idea, and that's what we've done in Antwerp, is to bring this natural light in as much as possible. Also, obviously, encouraging movement through the building and acoustic treatment so that many different things can happen at the same time. Very important is the idea of connection to the outside. So you can see through the windows, the trees. This is what we call biophilia. And biophilia really is that connection to all things that are live. And when we look at trees, it's actually proven that our heart rate goes down. So wherever possible, try and create that connection to the outside. Darlene, there.
Well done. You speeded up so we were able to get a little a 1-minute session in here. We'll recognize that there's a few questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much, folks. I think the theme that's coming through the comments and previously asked questions and the ones there is to how do we do some of these wonderful things but with less of the resources, more difficult, challenging perhaps spaces and less flexibility. But I think one of the things to keep in mind here is possibly that those sorts of questions could be answered through email. And I think, Jane, you and Emily have indicated you're more than happy to answer those questions after the session. So perhaps we can go straight into, because we've run over a bit of time in that first bit. And if we could go into your inspiring spaces and then hear from Andreas, then we can finish off if we have time for a couple of questions to answer here. Otherwise, we'll keep the space and time for your presentation and replying. You can reply to questions through email. Is that okay?
Okay,
Cool.
so thanks, Darlene.
No problem.
So we'll move on to spaces which inspire. So what's so exciting for us as architects is that architecture is powerfully symbolic, but it's not that it's just symbolic. It's also that, in fact, the spaces that you create, the spaces that you design will create change themselves, you know? And so for us, as I said at the beginning, how can we decide what change needs to happen unless we first understand Antwerp? And that's exactly what we did. And then designed spaces which, when we talk about what Antwerp looks like, it's an inspirational space. We know that and it's inspirational on different layers. So students were very positive about what, we kind of spoke to them and said, if I was a new family coming into the space, or a new student, what impact would this, do you think this would create in my mind? And the words they used were futuristic, modern, a flourishing school. So there's that layer of symbolism of what this building is saying to outside users. And then the next layer is kind of what's it saying to inside users. And then they started to use words like calm and creative, and it inspires me, and it's a good place to learn. So all of these things are just, so positive and so exciting for us. And I think what's crucial is always, what is it that you want a space to say about you as an organization? How does the architecture actually reflect that? And then also, how does the architecture enhance your culture going forward? Another example I'd just like to touch upon is, this is the International School of Brussels. And this was a space purely focused on admissions. So focused on that experience of families coming in to see, whether they wanted to send their child to the school. And what Brussels wanted to achieve here was that the celebration of the old and the new. So the heart of their campus is a very old sort of a chateau, a palace type building, which is protected. Every single thing about this building is protected, down to the wooden floor, which you see over there. And they wanted to celebrate their history, this harking back to the beginning of the school, but also show, wow, we're very modern, we're very forward thinking. And so what we designed was a space within a space. So this element which you see here, which is a combination of stainless steel, glass, and this bespoke screen element, from which the admissions professional can pull up crucial information for the visiting families. The idea is that everything's egalitarian, everybody's on the same level. There could be, a child perched on one of these chairs as well, where some of you might be familiar with the more traditional admissions process, where you've got someone sitting behind a desk kind of interviewing the family. So this was to make people feel inclusive and welcomed within that space. And the beauty of the whole thing is that literally within 2 days, you could dismantle this, be done, take it out of the room, and we haven't actually destroyed any of the original building. I'm going to end on this picture of lockers, because the topic of this was kind of inspiration and beauty, and you might think that's really odd to end on this, but I think the point is that we try every single space, even such a utilitarian space as lockers, should be beautiful. So in this particular example, you've got this view through to the outside, you've got this view to, the football table kind of inspiring you. It's light, it's bright, and we believe, it's a very pleasant space to be in. So the idea is that we want our spaces to be beautiful. We want to spark joy. We want people to feel happy when they're in the spaces, and that extends even towards, even through the locker areas as well. So I'm going to hand over to Andreas now.
Okay, thank you, Jane, and welcome everybody. I see a few familiar faces, or not faces, names on the chat list. So welcome to all those who have been in touch with before. And thanks for your enthusiastic presentation so far, Jane. It's really inspiring to see you so engaged still with our project here. I think the major messages that I would want to bring to this community are three, actually. The first one is there is never a perfect time to begin a major project like ours, whether it's architectural, whether it's pedagogical, or whether it's strategic as well. The second one is probably that architectural transformation can really be a catalyst of school transformation, of school pedagogy and school culture as well. And I think the third message is that it's never over, the whole thing. Yeah? There will never be a time when you can say we have done it and you can sit back, because we're constantly learning, we're constantly developing, our building is constantly learning and developing as well. So Jane, if you can move to the next slide, please. I want to first go on the not ever be a perfect time to begin. Why am I saying that? Maybe a little bit about how we got to do that whole project. Because we had a need to renovate a building that was old and tired, and we had a need to do it on STEM. That's why it actually has developed into a STEM zone, the whole thing. But when we set off, we had no idea what would be thrown into our way, what obstacles came along on the way. And I want to start with NEASC itself, because we had the idea for this whole project in 2016, 2017. At that time, the new NEASC ACE learning protocol, or the principles, were just out. And it was the latest thing that we kind of engaged in. At the beginning, I thought, oh, another thing coming on. But then I was invited to join the NEASC Commission as well. And my understanding of the concepts and everything developed rapidly, mainly because I was a visiting team member as well of accreditation visits. And not enough with that, 2 years later, I think it was something like IB and NEASC joined forces and developed the CLP, the Collaborative Learning Protocol. So again, another thing that you had to react to, but it was all for us in a way perfect, because it was exactly in line with our development as a school and our thinking as a school. I don't have to mention that we all had to deal with COVID-19 and all the things that were done. We literally started the project or the construction work on the first day of COVID. So you can imagine all the preparations we had done to cater for students being in different buildings. It was all nothing because we moved online, which had on the one hand a bit of an advantage as well, because at least nobody was disturbed with the building. Then we always had in mind sustainability. But why am I bringing that example? Because when we were talking about the building and sustainability, we were thinking about the usual things, the impact on our environment, the impact on our world. We used clearly sustainable material. We had all these high ambitions to build this project. But I actually only put it on today in the morning because since then, the world has changed dramatically again. And sustainability is now not only a thing for us for making the world a better place, it has become a real economic issue as well. And we are really looking into, again, we are already trying to even improve the building now by putting sustainable energy, as renewable energy forms into that building. And it has become a real issue here as well. So along the way, I said already that we encountered NEASC, we encountered ACE. So I'm coming to the second point as a catalyst for transformation. How did we do that? And I used the point here of the guiding statements, which we reviewed as well. When we started the project, we did extensive stakeholder involvement engagement. Jane has already said that. So we made design review processes. We did the usual thing. You involve everybody to have buy-in to the whole project. We trained at the same time, or we started training at the same time, all our faculty and staff in the conceptual understanding of ACE as well. And on the way, we realized, oh, actually, we have to change our entire structure. So we started reviewing our guiding statements. We started questioning the entire purpose of the school. And suddenly we found ourselves in the midst of a strategic planning process that went far beyond just a new building. And at the same time, I mentioned it already, CLP came along. But CLP was really for us the changer, the game changer, because it provided for us the perfect framework to deal with everything rather than parallel, where you have strategy, you have building, you have pedagogy and everything. It was all streamlined and even connected to accreditation for us. And so we went through the usual kind of internal reflection processes. We went through committee structures and everything. But the interesting bit was when everything was over, when COVID more or less was over in summer 2021, let's say it was on the brink of being over, when the building was ready, we somehow had everybody on the same mindset. And everybody, when we moved into that building, somehow saw it as a new start, as a new beginning, and occupied the space with a completely new mindset, a completely new approach to pedagogy. And it has developed since then into much more than just a place for STEM. And I mean, it was never intended just to be for STEM, but it is a collaborative learning space, and it is actively used as a collaborative learning space now. So we are now in year 2 past COVID, and we're in year 2 past COP, we're in year 2 past construction. And the entire process has resulted in a 5-year strategic plan that revealed for us 5 major learning goals, if I use the terminology of NEASC as well. We are currently in a research phase where our entire faculty is working in committees and researching terms like autonomy, if I use the NEASC terminology. We are researching agency, if I use the IB terminology, or we are researching self-determination, if I use our own terminology. We are researching actively assessment for, of, and as learning, which concepts are behind it, or I think NEASC new terminology in there is as well evidence of learning. And we are actively thinking about what does inclusion, what does diversity, equity, belonging, and everything mean for us as a school. So the building is learning, we are learning on a constant basis, and we are actively trying to find ways to facilitate this new learning space at the time as well. So I think the next 2 slides are actually really good answers to the questions that came up in the question answer section, what I saw here. There were 2 questions, I think, about how do we measure learning impact? That's the holy grail, I have to say as well. So how are we doing? First of all, how do you word your learning impacts? That's the first big challenge, and not just take the ones that are preset for you. And then how do we measure it? And I would like to come back to our approach, or what I think is the best way, is what's the best way, I think, in schools to assess as well, is formative assessment. Formative assessment consists of observations, conversations, reflections as well. And here you see on this sheet, on this slide now, staff reflections of how this space has influenced their learning. And that was actually done about, when was it, about a year ago, this reflection. We just did it as one of our normal PD days. And I'll leave you to read through it. But it was mind-blowing how positive our staff reacted to the space, and what it did to their teaching. How the old confined space restricted their teaching, and how the new open collaborative space suddenly pushed them to new horizons without us even interfering too much in it. And I think the next one, I think, Jane, is about the students. So here you have the students. And as usual, and as to be expected, you probably have this experience as well. Put kids into a new place, they occupy it within 2 minutes, and they make it their own. And that was exactly what happened here as well. We opened the building on the first school day. After 10 minutes, they occupied the spaces. They were everywhere in there, and they started exploring. And one thing I think as well, what the building is doing for us, or what it is proving very much, is all these fears that we had, that the kids might abuse the freedom, the kids might abuse the spaces and do naughty things. It's not happening at all. Yeah? The kids are actively using that space for their learning. They love it, they respect it, they care for it. And we have opened displays throughout that space that are easily accessible for anybody. We have 0 damages in there as well. So such a new space, such an inviting space does really a lot to the kids. And if we put the trust in them, they will not abuse that trust. It's probably one of my messages as well. And I think that's already my part, isn't it, Jane? Maybe the challenges still. I don't have to tell you about the challenges, and I already alluded a little bit to it. There's never a perfect time to start something like that. And when you start it, just go for it, I would say, and react to the things that are being thrown at you or towards you on the way. So we had to be highly reactive to changing concepts, to changing pedagogy that came in. And I see the last 5 years, at least in my experience, as an area where really lots of changes have come out of very established organizations like the IBO, like the NEASC themselves. Then clearly you have to deal with the staff turnover. That is still an ongoing issue for us. How do we implement all these major learning goals with the staff turnover? We have not gotten our head around it completely, but it will probably result into constant working with the people, training the people when they come in, and trying to share with them our philosophy. And it clearly has to do with recruitment as well, that we get the people with the right mindset. I mean, the whole process needed a lot of very careful management, and I don't have to tell anybody out there. I think, how many do we have? We have about 100 people here. With COVID-19 coming towards us, one of the biggest obstacles was for us to keep the schools operational, to manage them. And to my understanding, I think 99% of our schools have done that in a wonderful way as well. Project team structure, ongoing need for courage. I don't have to tell you anything about it. And then we have a classical research cycle as well. We research, we adjust, we reflect, we research, we adjust, we reflect as well. That was carrying on along the whole project. So I already said that as well. There's ongoing learning in here. We will never stop learning with the building. We are discovering new things every day. The kids are discovering new things every day. The teachers are really sometimes blowing my mind with how far they have come. Really, sometimes teachers have been with us for 15, 20 years, traditional in their approach, and suddenly their mindset has changed completely. So we are learning, the building is learning, everybody's learning, and I think that's what schools are all about. That's it from me, I think, Jane.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andreas. It's wonderful for you to have answered so much about the questions about impact. How do we evaluate impact? It's asking the students and the teachers what is different with the new spaces. And I think the other questions that were coming up around the spaces were about how you, with the large spaces, Jane, you were talking about how you manage things like acoustics and safety. But I think, as we said before, I'll forward you those questions and you can reply to them through emails if people would like to be in touch with you, or if we have time at the very end. But now, could we hear from Emily in your last section? Thank you.
Thank you. So we've been really excited to share our ideas with you and our belief in the power of architecture to support education. However, and it's a very big however, the very act of building is destroying the planet. It's a fact. And we know that the construction industry is responsible for about 40% of carbon emissions today. We know that between 1/3 and 1/2 of all species will face extinction by the end of this century. We know that the sea level along the US coastline is predicted to rise 30 centimeters by 2050, with flooding expected to occur 10 times as often as it does today. And obviously it's been all over the news as well the last few days of what's happening in Florida. And we know that 99% of the stuff we buy is discarded within 6 months. And every year we send over 2 billion tons of waste to landfill globally. And while climate change affects all of us, those who have contributed the least to climate change, our children, they're the ones who are going to suffer the most. Save the Children estimates that 38 million children have their education disrupted by climate change and extreme weather events every single year. So what can we do? So most importantly, we must reduce our energy consumption, remembering the energy hierarchy. We must be lean by insulating our buildings, installing sensors for lights so that they'll automatically turn off when classrooms are empty, and using mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. We must be clean by upgrading our electrical appliances and boilers to new energy efficient models. We must be green by adding renewable energy such as solar panels to our roofs and switching to renewable energy tariffs. And to truly realise sustainable design and buildings, we must have a better understanding of their actual operational energy performance by seeing the results through monitoring and reporting. And the second most important action that we must all take is to reduce the amount of Earth's finite resources that we are wasting, remembering the circular economy approach. Prevent. And the first question we always ask our clients as architects is, do we actually need to build this? Or can we adapt our existing spaces to achieve the same outcome? Do we have to have our milk supplied in plastic cartons, or can we switch to reusable milk churns? Reduce. Can we timetable equipment so that it can be shared between classrooms? And can we retrofit energy water reduction devices into our bathrooms? Reuse. Can we reuse the existing building structure and the existing furniture like Antwerp did? Recycle. Are we making recycling an easy and fun part of everyday school life? And are we recycling every item possible? And dispose. Can we send waste canteen food to be used as animal feed? Can we have chickens on site which can be used to teach the children? And remember, lastly, none of our hopes, none of our dreams, none of our plans and expectations can survive the loss of a habitable planet.
Thank you very much, Emily. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, I left Emily with the hard message, which she delivered so well. But seriously, this is something that is of extreme concern to us. And we all need to recognize that we need to take an active part in sustainability, and not least when we begin to create new school spaces. So we are just adamant that this is part and parcel of the process. Very, very important. If we want to achieve what we showed at the beginning, then we need to think about how we can do that in the most sustainable way. And I think in terms of Antwerp, we achieved that because it was a reuse of a building. So reuse is the #1 mantra for us. The second thing is there was reuse of furniture that Antwerp already had. We reused it in the STEM zone. When we designed sort of furniture elements, they're designed to be mechanically taken apart and reused in the future in a different way. The flooring was entirely made from offcuts of pieces of oak. So it's all of those kinds of things which desperately need to be considered whenever we do a project like this. So what we'd like to hear now is your thoughts. Sorry, Darlene.
No, I was just going to say, Jane, that there's been a number of questions about, as I mentioned before, how to try and do this in a smaller way. I mean, what are the baby steps that you could suggest, the beginning steps for those who don't have the capacity or the possibility in the immediate future to do a big school whole building rebuild? What are the sorts of things that teachers and or leaders could do that would be initiating some changes within the school that would help?
So I think obviously it's very dependent on the individual example, but just simple things. So say, for example, you might have a school that's designed along more traditional lines. So the corridors with kind of, the cells and bells, and the classrooms off the corridors. What you could do is, if you have the capacity, is possibly deconstruct one of those classrooms. So as you're walking down the corridor, you may have classroom, and then the wall is gone and you have an open space, which already immediately creates a sense of openness and a sense of an opportunity for collaboration. So that's kind of like an easy win, if that's possible in terms of the number of students you have in the school. I think it's also helpful, obviously, Antwerp and Northern Europe has to respond to a very extreme climate. But I think if you're lucky enough to be in a country where it's maybe a bit warmer, so for example, myself coming from South Africa, a lot of sort of learning takes place outside. A lot of that kind of the collaboration can happen outside because it's warm for most of the year. So if, for example, you might not have the money, but you might have a conducive climate that you can actually easily move outside. Maybe you just need some sun shading or something like that. You can have classrooms ranged around that, but you move outside into a collaborative space is one particular option. But I think the key to all of this is to really think ask yourself, as you do when you start to implement the learning principles, what is it that we as a school want to achieve? What is our aim? So first kind of decide that, and then decide the space that you need to support that process. And I think it can be done, you have a master plan for what your ultimate goal is, but then if you only have resources to do a certain amount at a certain time, then you can do that as well.
Thank you. I wanted to bring us back to the question you started us with, and that was, what are some of the places that you loved and that supported your learning, and other places that got in the way of your learning? And just give you a couple of examples. There were a lot of responses, which you'll get when you get the chat, Jane and Emily. But there was one example of a classroom that was with a tank full of tadpoles, and you can just imagine the kids' excitement and joy at all of the energy and action. And the other, obviously the one that was less pleasant, was the staff room, from a child's experience, that was dark and forbidding, and you only ever went there when you're in trouble. So it was definitely, people have spaces connected with experiences to do with their learning.
And that's such a fantastic example, Darlene, because obviously we want to try and mitigate that. We don't want children to be living in fear, when they're going to school. And I think certainly at Antwerp, obviously there has to be a boundary. I do believe firmly that staff need that space to withdraw into. So in Antwerp, they can use the collaborative spaces. Everything is open for everybody, but there is a dedicated staff space. And I think that's very important, because I think teaching is incredibly demanding, and sometimes you need to withdraw into a protected space. Having said that, though, there are windows. Students can actually see into the staff room from the collaboration staircase. And also when they come to the door is glazed. So there's a sense of the staff can see there's a student waiting outside. The students can see into the staff room, see what's happening. And I think that helps to kind of break down those boundaries.
So there are all sorts of ways out there of making changes that can change the nature and the feelings around spaces to enable things to change. Andreas, can I ask you a quick question? And I think it came in the Q&A. I'm not sure if everyone will have seen the answer. Where the question was, is your whole school all of these amazing places, or do you have traditional classrooms as well? I think it's fair for you to say, give your answer to all.
Yes, I tried to answer a few of the questions and answers. I'm not sure, I wasn't aware. I thought it goes to everybody, but no, by far not. I can only say we only started to transform the school. We had buildings, or many buildings were built in the 90s, some of them in the 80s. That what you see here was built in 1976 as well, and that was the most urgent one. But we have traditional spaces still in the school. The nice thing is, what's happening is that even the people or the students that still have to use the traditional spaces, they start to use the collaborative learning space more and more. Yeah. And I think there's one other question was here, a very practical one about threats, about lockdown procedures when we have all these spaces. I wrote in the answer here, I think it's an excellent question. I strongly, first of all, I should say, I strongly believe we should guide it by our pedagogical principles rather than just security and safety principles as well. There are nice ways to work around. If you have, for example, glass panels, there are expensive ways to work around where you can darken these glass panels. We didn't do any of those things. You can have blinds. We decided to use our more traditional spaces as safe havens in the building, where the kids can take shelter if there's an intruder problem, for example. Yeah, but all these practical problems are a very good reflection of what we have to deal when we are trying to implement our pedagogical ideas with the practical constraints that we have to deal on a daily basis as well. Yeah.
And I think from our perspective as architects, and I recognize that obviously everybody has different criteria that they have to respond to in terms of security and emergencies and that kind of thing. But I think for us, as much as possible, and in some countries you don't even need to do this, but as much as possible, focus on the boundary. So securing the boundary and then having a number of containment areas so that actually stopping people getting in is the key. And by the boundary, I mean the site boundary as much as possible, so that the deeper you go into the building, the more freedom you can have, the more freedom that the users can actually have once they're safely within the space.
Thank you, Jane. And Jane, can I ask you to put up your contact details on the end? Because I know you and Emily have agreed that if people have a particular question that they have, they can write to you. Please also, my email is at the top there. If you've got any questions about the ACE protocol or CLP that Andreas was talking about, please do feel free to get in touch. And for all of you to know, we have recorded the session, and we will be sending out a link so that you can access the webinar again at your leisure and or share it with those who you feel will be most benefit. So first, can I say thank you hugely to Andreas and Jane and Emily for giving up your time and sharing your passion for education and change through architecture. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience for me to hear it a bit more detail. And I know a lot of people here are already saying wonderful presentation and thank you in the chat. So we'll keep that going. But thank you everyone for being here, and look forward to hearing from you.